The old motel sign came down on a Tuesday morning. It did not fall the way I imagined endings should fall. There was no crash that made everyone stop working. No crowd gathered on the shoulder of Route 17. No dramatic wind. No rain. No final groan from the old building like it understood what was happening. A man in an orange safety vest climbed into a lift, loosened 4 rusted bolts, and lowered the sign with the same tired patience someone might use to take down a shelf in a garage. Blue Ridge Motor Inn. The letters were sunburned and cracked. The B had not lit up since I was in high school. The R buzzed whenever it rained. The word INN had hung crooked for so long that my father used to say the place looked like it was shrugging at the road. I stood across the parking lot with a paper cup of coffee going cold in my hand and watched the sign settle onto a flatbed trailer. My younger son, Ben, asked if we were allowed to keep it. My older son, Noah, did not say anything. He was 12 then, old enough to understand that when adults tear something down, they are not always destroying it. Sometimes they are admitting it has already finished its job. My phone buzzed before the crane arm even folded back into place. Grant. I had not seen my husband in person for almost 4 months, unless you count the courthouse hallway where he stood beside his attorney and kept looking at my shoes instead of my face. His message said, "We need to talk about what you're doing with that property." That property. I stared at those 2 words until the screen dimmed. The last time Grant had spoken about that property, he had called it dead weight. A money pit. A roadside embarrassment. He had said my father must have been sentimental or confused. Then he had stood in our kitchen, with our son's cereal bowl still in the sink, and told me that if I wanted to defend the place so badly, I could take the boys and go live in it. So I did. I took 2 suitcases, 1 laundry basket full of clothes that still smelled like our house, a grocery bag of toothbrushes and chargers, my father's estate folder, and my 2 sons, who were trying very hard not to ask whether their father was sending us away for good. For a while, I thought that was the worst night of my life. I was wrong. The worst part was not leaving the house. It was not driving 40 minutes in the dark while Ben slept with his cheek against the booster seat and Noah pretended to sleep because he did not want me to know he was scared. It was not opening room 6 and finding dust on the lampshade, a water stain on the ceiling, and a television remote with no batteries. It was not spraying the sheets with disinfectant until my throat burned, then spreading our jackets over the pillows because I could not make my children sleep directly on motel bedding that had been locked behind stale air for months. The worst part was sitting alone in the front office after midnight, in my father's old chair, with highway noise moving beyond the glass, realizing that for 1 terrible hour I had believed them. I had believed my husband. I had believed my sister. I had believed my brother-in-law, my aunt's awkward silence, the realtor's raised eyebrows, the banker's careful tone, and every person who looked at the Blue Ridge Motor Inn and saw proof that my father had given me the smaller life. I had even believed, for a few minutes, that maybe my father had looked at his 2 daughters and decided my sister could handle the real asset while I could handle his leftover mistake. Then I found the first number in his ledger. Parcel 18B. 3 digits and 1 letter, written in blue ink beside an electric bill from February. At first, it meant nothing to me. My father wrote numbers on everything. He was the kind of man who kept receipts for oil changes on trucks he no longer owned and labeled coffee cans with things like roof, taxes, Christmas, and Claire's boys. A parcel number was not a miracle. But then I saw it again. Parcel 18B, survey marker west fence. And again. 18B certified mail returned? Call county. And again. 18B/access study/do not discuss. That was when the motel stopped feeling empty. Not valuable yet. Not safe. Not like rescue. Just not empty. My father had always told me, "Claire, don't sign anything just because other people are tired of waiting." When I was younger, I thought he was talking about used cars, rental agreements, school forms, all the ordinary traps people get pushed into when someone with a louder voice says, "Come on, it's simple." I did not understand he was leaving me instructions for the moment when everyone around me would suddenly want me to hurry. My name is Claire Hart Mercer. I was 35 years old when my father died, though there were days after his funeral when I felt older than every person in the room and younger than my own children. My father, Leonard Hart, owned things people underestimated. That was not a slogan. It was how he lived. He bought a narrow strip mall beside a drainage ditch when everyone said the location was ugly, then waited 13 years until the county widened the road and a coffee chain wanted the corner. He bought a storage building nobody wanted because the roof leaked, then fixed the roof and rented half the units to contractors who could not afford warehouse space closer to town. He once bought an empty lot behind a tire shop because, as he told me, people look at the front door and forget the back gate. He was not rich in the way my sister liked rich people to look. He did not golf. He did not wear watches that needed insurance. He drove an old cream-colored Ford truck with a cracked dashboard and kept peppermint candies in the glove compartment. He wore flannel shirts into bank meetings and once told a loan officer, "Son, your tie costs more than your understanding of that drainage map." My sister Vanessa used to say Dad had money but no polish. She was not wrong. He could walk into a planning meeting with mud on his boots and still know more about the property than the men with leather portfolios. He could sit through 2 hours of county discussion without saying a word, then ask one question that made every developer in the room look down at their papers. I loved that about him when I was young. Then I grew up and married a man who valued polish. Grant Mercer liked finished surfaces. Glass doors. Smooth countertops. Clean cars. New shoes. People who could explain themselves in business language. He liked words like equity, leverage, asset class, revenue stream, and strategic exit. He liked telling people he was building something, though what he was building changed depending on who was listening. When we first met, he was charming in a practical way. He brought me soup when I had the flu. He changed the brake light on my car without making me feel helpless. He shook my father's hand firmly and told him he respected old-school business owners. He looked at me like my softness was something he wanted to protect. I did not know then that some people love softness because it gives them somewhere to press. Grant did not start by calling me useless. That would have been easier to recognize. He started by correcting small things with a smile. The way I folded invoices. The way I explained something in front of his clients. The way I hesitated before answering questions about money. At first, he made it sound like guidance. Let me handle that. Numbers stress you out. Then it became habit. I'll talk to the accountant. You always miss the big picture. Then it became identity. Claire is great with the boys, he would tell people, one hand resting on my shoulder. She keeps the house from falling apart. People smiled when he said it. I smiled too, because the sentence sounded like praise if you did not live inside it. But what he meant was simple. I was useful in rooms where nobody paid attention. I was not useful where decisions were made. When I quit my part-time bookkeeping job after Ben was born because childcare cost almost as much as I made, Grant told everyone we had decided I would focus on the home. He said it with warmth. He said it like gratitude. But when money was tight, he would stand in the kitchen, looking at dishes, backpacks, grocery lists, school forms, and say, "It must be nice not having the pressure on you." I used to answer. I used to explain that pressure had different shapes. That I paid bills, scheduled appointments, handled school emails, managed insurance forms, stretched grocery money, picked up medicine, helped him prepare invoices when his consulting jobs ran late, and made the house work so he could keep chasing bigger contracts. But explaining your labor to someone who benefits from not counting it is another form of unpaid work. So after a while I stopped. My father noticed. He did not say much, because Dad was not the kind of man who stepped into a marriage with both boots unless someone was bleeding. But sometimes, when Grant corrected me in front of people, Dad would go quiet in a way I later understood was not approval. It was record-keeping. When Vanessa talked over me at dinner, Dad noticed. When Paul laughed at something I said about money, Dad noticed. When Grant praised me for keeping the house steady but never asked what that steadiness cost, Dad noticed. For years, I mistook his silence for passivity. Later, I understood that my father was building a test none of them knew they were taking. Once, about 6 months before he died, Dad and I were sitting on the back steps of his house while Noah and Ben ran through the sprinkler. Grant and Vanessa were inside talking about refinancing, or investors, or some other conversation that sounded expensive from the next room. Vanessa had recently started introducing herself as a multifamily property investor, which sounded better than saying she and Paul owned one beautiful apartment building with a marble lobby and a roof that leaked in 3 places. Dad handed me a glass of lemonade and looked toward the house. "Some properties only look good from the lobby," he said. I laughed because I thought he was making fun of Vanessa's building. He did not laugh with me. He looked back at the boys. "You remember that? That was how my father gave warnings. Half advice, half weather report. You never knew which half mattered until the storm arrived. When he died, it happened both slowly and suddenly. He had been sick, but not sick in the way that makes everyone prepare their hearts. He still drove himself to the diner. He still argued with the pharmacy about overcharging him $7. He still called me every Friday to ask whether the boys needed anything, and if I said no, he would show up with batteries, socks, apples, and some tool he insisted every household should have. Then one morning, he did not answer his phone. By noon, I was standing in his kitchen with a sheriff's deputy I had known since high school, staring at the chair where Dad had sat down with his coffee and never gotten back up. Vanessa cried loudly at the funeral. I do not say that cruelly. My sister loved our father in her own way. But Vanessa's grief had always needed witnesses. She held tissues in both hands, leaned into Paul, and told everyone how impossible it was to imagine life without Daddy. I cried in the bathroom. I cried in my car. I cried once in the aisle of a grocery store because I saw the brand of peppermint candies he kept in his glove compartment. At the funeral, Grant wore his navy suit and rested one hand between my shoulder blades whenever people came near. From the outside, it probably looked like comfort. From where I was standing, it felt like a reminder to behave. The will reading took place 3 weeks later in a conference room that smelled like paper, coffee, and furniture polish. Dad's attorney, Mr. Halpern, was an older man with a careful voice and glasses he kept removing and cleaning even when they were already clean. I had known him since I was little. He had handled Dad's closings for years. Vanessa came dressed like she was attending a board meeting. Cream blazer. Gold earrings. Hair curled softly around her face. Paul sat beside her, one ankle resting on his knee, looking relaxed in a way that annoyed me before anything even happened. Grant sat to my right. He scrolled through his phone under the table until Mr. Halpern cleared his throat. My Aunt Lydia came because Dad had left her a small insurance policy and his fishing boat. She kept patting my hand and saying, "Your father was fair-minded," which made me feel worse because nobody says that unless they expect someone to feel cheated. Mr. Halpern began with the smaller things. Dad left his truck to Noah, though Noah was only 12 and would have to wait years to drive it. He left Ben his coin collection, which was worth less money than Ben imagined and more memory than he could understand yet. He left money to his church's food pantry, not because Dad went every Sunday, but because he always said God cared less about attendance than groceries. Then Mr. Halpern reached the property list. To my daughter Vanessa Hart Dillard, he read, I leave my full ownership interest in the residential building known as the Marlowe Apartments, including all associated rental accounts, operating records, reserve accounts, and management files. Vanessa inhaled softly. I saw it even though she tried to hide it. A tiny lift of her chin. A little brightness around the eyes. The careful stillness of someone trying not to look like she had just won. The Marlowe was beautiful from the street. For stories of renovated brick, black awnings, planters by the entrance, a lobby with marble tile Vanessa loved to photograph. Dad had bought it before the neighborhood became expensive. Everyone in town knew it was one of his best-looking holdings. Grant shifted beside me. Not toward me. Away from me. Mr. Halpern continued. To my daughter Claire Hartmercer, I leave the property and business interests associated with the Blue Ridge Motor Inn, including all land, structures, fixtures, records, rights, and related assets. No one spoke. That was what I remember most. Not laughter. Not gasps. Silence. The kind of silence that is not empty, only busy. Vanessa looked down at her lap. Paul pressed his mouth into a line. Aunt Lydia patted my hand again, slower this time, like she was apologizing through her fingers. Grant stopped moving completely. The Blue Ridge Motor Inn had not operated properly in years. It sat off Route 17, 28 minutes from downtown if traffic behaved and nearly an hour if it did not. It had 12 rooms, a cracked pool filled with leaves, an office with wood paneling, an ice machine that worked only when it wanted attention, and a gravel lot behind it where weeds grew tall enough to hide a small child. When I was little, Dad took me there on Saturday mornings while he checked the books. Back then, truckers still stopped there. Families on road trips bought sodas from the vending machine. The room smelled like bleach and coffee. There was a brass bell on the front counter I loved to ring until Dad said, Claire, someday you are going to make a man crazy with that thing. But traffic changed. The newer interstate exit pulled travelers away. Chain hotels moved closer to the commercial center. Online bookings punished places without updates. The Blue Ridge slowly became one of those buildings people passed without seeing. Dad never sold it. I had never asked why. That was my mistake. Mr. Halpern finished reading, but I remember almost none of the words after that. There were signatures. Questions. A folder pushed toward me. Vanessa hugged me in a way that pressed her perfume into my throat. Dad was sentimental about that place, she whispered. Maybe she meant it kindly. Maybe she meant, better you than me. In the parking lot, Grant unlocked the car but did not open my door. He had opened my door for 10 years. Sometimes from love. Sometimes from habit. Sometimes because other people were watching. That day, he walked around to the driver's side and got in. I stood there 1 second too long before opening my own door. The boys were at school, so the drive home was quiet. Grant did not turn on the radio. He did not ask whether I was okay. He kept both hands on the steering wheel and stared at the road as if it had personally disappointed him. I finally said, "It's still property." He laughed once. Not loudly. That would have been easier. It was the small laugh that told me he had already built a whole case against me in his head. "Claire," he said, "don't do that." "Do what?" "Pretend you don't understand what happened." I looked out the window at a line of maple trees along the road. "What happened?" "Your sister got the asset. You got the cleanup." I turned toward him. "My father would not leave me garbage." Grant's jaw moved. "Your father loved you," he said. That does not mean he made a smart decision. It was such a careful sentence. Gentle enough to sound reasonable. Sharp enough to cut. That night, Vanessa invited herself over. She said we should all eat together because Dad would want the family united. She brought roasted chicken from the expensive market near the Marlow and a bottle of wine with a label I did not recognize. Paul came with her. Aunt Lydia arrived 20 minutes late carrying a pie. I cooked the vegetables because that was what I did when I did not know what else to do. Grant opened the wine. At dinner, Vanessa talked about the Marlow in a tone that tried to sound overwhelmed but came out pleased. There's a lot to handle, she said, touching her napkin to the corner of her mouth. Tenants, maintenance, reserve accounts, property management, taxes. I told Paul we'll probably need to meet with the manager immediately. Paul nodded. It's a serious asset. You can't just let something like that sit. Grant looked across the table at him. No, he said. Some things need people who know what they're doing. The room changed. Aunt Lydia looked at her pie. I focused on cutting Ben's chicken because he hated the stringy parts. Vanessa smiled, but she did not tell Grant to stop. That hurt more than the comment. Grant lifted his glass and said, well, Leonard knew one thing. Vanessa can handle real estate. Nobody laughed exactly. But Vanessa smiled. Paul gave a little breath through his nose. Aunt Lydia murmured, now, in the useless way people do when they want to object without changing anything. I felt Noah looking at me from across the table. He was 12, old enough to understand tone, too young to know what to do with it. Ben was 8 and mostly concerned with whether there was dessert. I said, Dad left me real estate too. Grant did not even look at me. Claire, he said softly, like I was embarrassing him, it's a roadside motel with black mold in 2 rooms and a pool you could plant corn in. Vanessa lowered her eyes. That was the first time I saw it clearly. My sister was not laughing at me. She was relieved. There is a difference. After dinner, Vanessa hugged me in the foyer. You know, she said, if you need help figuring out what to do with it, Paul knows some brokers. Thanks. I mean it. Don't get stuck holding something expensive just because Dad was attached. Grant, standing behind me, said, that's what I keep telling her. He had not told me anything except that I had lost. After they left, I carried plates to the sink. The house had that strange after-dinner quiet, all the noise gone but the heat of it still hanging in the rooms. The boys went upstairs. Aunt Lydia's pie sat half-eaten on the counter. Grant stood at the island with his arms folded. We need to talk. I kept rinsing plates. Can it wait until tomorrow? No. I turned off the faucet. He looked tired, but not sad. That is an important distinction. I can't keep carrying everything while you make emotional decisions, he said. I wiped my hands on a towel. What emotional decision? The motel. I haven't made any decision. That's the problem. You're going to freeze. You'll sit on it because it was your dad's, and meanwhile taxes, insurance, repairs, utilities, God knows what else will start draining us. Us? He blinked. We're married. You didn't call it ours when Mr. Halpern read the will. That's not fair. I laughed, though nothing was funny. Fair? Grant leaned forward. His voice stayed controlled. He rarely yelled. He preferred making me sound unreasonable for noticing the knife. You're not thinking clearly. Your father died. You feel rejected because Vanessa got the Marlow. So now you want to turn this motel into some symbol. I never said that. You never have to say things. You just sit there with that hurt look and make everyone else feel cruel. That stopped me. Because it was almost true, twisted just enough to become false. I did sit there. I did get hurt. I did make people feel cruel sometimes, not because I accused them, but because my silence left them alone with what they had said. Grant took that silence as proof. See, he said. This is what I mean. I'm going to look at the records before I decide anything. You don't know how to evaluate a commercial property. I did your books for 3 years. You paid invoices. I caught the double billing on the Camden job. His face changed for half a second. That was different. No, it wasn't. He ran one hand over his mouth. Claire, I need a wife who understands reality. Vanessa understands reality. Paul understands reality. Your father, for all his quirks, understood reality. But you. He stopped. Some part of me wanted him to stop there forever. He did not. You mistake quiet for competence. The towel twisted in my hands. He looked toward the stairs where our boys had disappeared. Maybe you should go stay at your motel for a few days. I stared at him. He said it like a suggestion. Like a cooling-off period. Like something practical. What? You heard me. Take the boys if you want. You keep defending the place. Go see what you're defending. Grant. No, seriously. Maybe you need to stand in it. Smell it. Pay for it. Then maybe you'll stop pretending it's something it's not. I do not know how long I stood there. A clock ticked somewhere. The refrigerator hummed. Upstairs, Ben laughed at something Noah said, the sound small and bright and completely unaware. Grant softened his voice. Claire, don't turn this into abandonment. I'm trying to get you to wake up. That was how he always did it. He hit, then narrated the bruise as help. I walked past him and went upstairs. Noah was on his bed with a book open but unread. Ben was building something with plastic blocks on the floor. Pack a few things, I said. Noah sat up immediately. Why? We're going to stay somewhere for a couple nights. Ben looked excited. Like a hotel? I looked at his small face and could not answer quickly enough. Noah understood before I spoke. Dad's making us leave? No, I said. It was automatic. Motherhood does that to you. It makes you protect children from the truth even when the truth is standing downstairs holding the door open. No, I said again, softer. We're just going to get some space. Noah did not believe me, but he packed. Ben packed 2 stuffed animals, 3 toy cars, and 1 shoe before I helped him. I took clothes from drawers without folding them. Socks, pajamas, school shirts, underwear. I forgot my own coat and remembered the boys' allergy medicine. I grabbed toothbrushes, phone chargers, a half-full pack of wipes, the folder from Mr. Halpern, and the emergency cash Dad had once told me to keep in a coffee tin. Grant watched from the living room. He did not stop us. At the door, he said, Claire, don't make this dramatic. I turned around with 1 suitcase handle in my hand and Ben's backpack over my shoulder. No, I said. You already did. Then I walked out before he could improve the sentence. The Blue Ridge Motor Inn sat farther from everything at night. During the day, Route 17 was just a road. At night, it became a strip of headlights and darkness, like the world was passing by in pieces. The boys fell asleep before we reached the county line. Ben's head tilted against the booster seat. Noah pretended to sleep because he did not want me to know he was awake. The motel sign flickered when we pulled in. Blue Ridge Motor Inn. Vacancy. The word vacancy glowed with a weak red pulse, though no one had changed that sign in months. Maybe years. The parking lot had more weeds than cars. 1 security light buzzed near the office, drawing moths into frantic circles. I parked close to the front door and sat with my hands on the steering wheel. For 1 second, I hated my father. That is the sentence nobody wants to admit in stories like this, so I will tell the truth. I hated him for dying. I hated him for leaving me a problem. I hated him for making me defend a decision I did not understand. I hated that Vanessa was probably already walking through the Marlow with a notebook while I was sitting in a dark parking lot with 2 sleeping children and a key to a motel that smelled like mildew before I even opened the door. Then Ben stirred and whispered, "Are we here?" I got out. The office key stuck twice before turning. The door opened with a swollen wooden scrape. Inside, the air was stale and cool. It smelled like dust, old paper, and the faint sourness of rooms shut too long. I found the light switch by memory. The front office appeared in pieces. Counter. Bell. Pegboard with room keys. Coffee maker with a cracked pot. A rack of brochures for attractions that had closed before Ben was born. A framed photo of the motel from the 70s, when the paint was fresh and cars had fins. Dad's chair sat behind the counter. It was the same brown vinyl chair he had owned forever, patched on one arm with silver tape. I could not look at it for long. The rooms were worse than I expected but better than they could have been. Room 6 had a working lock, 2 beds, a bathroom that needed scrubbing but did not scare me, and curtains thick enough to make the boys feel hidden. I stripped the top blankets, sprayed the sheets with disinfectant from the office closet, wiped every surface until the paper towels came away gray instead of black, and spread our own jackets over the pillows. Ben woke fully then. "Is this Grandpa's motel?" "Yes." "Did he live here?" "No, baby. He just owned it." Noah stood by the window, looking out at the empty parking lot. "How long are we staying?" I wanted to say 2 nights. I wanted to say until your father apologizes. I wanted to say until I figure out how a marriage becomes a hallway where someone can lock you out while calling it practical. "Not long," I said. Noah nodded, which meant he heard the lie and was kind enough not to correct me. After the boys slept, I sat on the edge of the other bed and looked around the room. There was a brown water stain on the ceiling shaped like a map. The lamp between the beds had a switch that shocked me if I touched it wrong. Someone had carved the initials TM into the nightstand years ago. The television remote had no batteries. This was not where I thought my life would be at 35. Not after 10 years of marriage. Not after packing lunches, stretching grocery money, smoothing Grant's sharp edges in front of clients, and teaching my sons that their father worked hard because he loved them. Not after believing that if I stayed useful enough, patient enough, quiet enough, nobody would call me a burden. I left the room door cracked and walked back to the office. The motel office was colder now. The highway noise moved in waves beyond the glass. Every few seconds, a truck passed and made the windows tremble. I sat in Dad's chair. It made the same low squeak I remembered. For a while, I just sat there with my hands on the counter. Then I opened drawers. I did not know what I was looking for. Proof that Dad had a plan, maybe. Proof that he did not. Proof that I could blame someone besides myself for feeling foolish. The first drawer held old pens, rubber bands, a dried-out roll of breath mints, and a stack of room receipts from 2018. The second drawer held envelopes. Insurance. Pest control. Electric. Property tax. Nothing dramatic. The third drawer was stuck. I pulled harder, and it came open so suddenly that my elbow hit the counter. Inside was a ledger. Not a modern accounting book. A real ledger, the kind with a dark green cover and columns printed in pale lines. Dad had always preferred writing things down before entering them into a computer. He said paper slowed a man down enough to catch his own mistakes. I opened it. Most pages were ordinary. Utility bills. Repairs. Old room revenue. Notes about a plumber who overcharged him. A reminder to replace the ice machine he never replaced. Then I saw it. Parcel 18B. written beside the February electric bill. At first, I thought it might refer to a tax parcel. I turned the page. Parcel 18B, survey marker west fence. Another page. 18B certified mail returned? Call county. Another. 18B/access study/do not discuss. I read that last line twice. Do not discuss. My father was not secretive in the dramatic sense. He did not hide cash in walls or whisper into phones. But he was private about business when privacy mattered. He believed most people talked too early and paid for it later. I kept turning pages. In the back pocket of the ledger was a folded receipt from the county recorder's office. The date was 8 months earlier. The description said, copy request. Parcel map. Frontage adjustment. Route 17 corridor. I did not understand enough to be excited. But I understood enough not to close the ledger. Behind the counter, below the shelf where the old room keys hung, was a metal filing cabinet I remembered from childhood. It had been dented on one side since before I was born. Dad used to keep cleaning invoices and guest registration cards inside. The top drawer was unlocked. The folders were labeled in his handwriting. Rooms. Pool. Taxes. Insurance. Permits. Land. I pulled land. The folder was thicker than the others. Inside were survey maps, copies of deeds, county notices, letters from companies with names that sounded deliberately bland, and one yellow legal pad page covered in Dad's blocky handwriting. The first survey map showed the motel property as I knew it, a rectangle along Route 17, rooms in an L-shape, pool, office, gravel back lot. The second map showed something else. Behind the motel, past the gravel and weeds, the land extended farther than I had realized. Much farther. A long strip reached toward a wooded area I had always assumed belonged to the neighboring farm. On the back edge of that strip, Dad had drawn a blue line. Not straight. Angled. Near it, he had written. Proposed ramp alignment? Verify. I sat down slowly. A person can feel hope before they know what they are hoping for. It is not pleasant at first. It feels like fear wearing different clothes. I looked through the letters. Some were old, routine county notices. Drainage. Assessment. Utility easement. Some were from the State Transportation Department, written in the kind of language that makes important things look boring. One letter mentioned the Route 17 connector improvement study. Another mentioned potential interchange access. Another, dated 3 months before Dad died, said the Planning Commission would review proposed commercial rezoning along the northbound corridor. Commercial rezoning. I knew those words separately. Together, they made my mouth go dry. At the bottom of the folder was a certified letter from a development company called Meridian Road Partners. Mr. Hart, it began, following our prior conversation, our group remains interested in acquiring all or part of the Blue Ridge Motor and property, including rear acreage associated with Parcel 18B. The amount in the letter was not small. It was not huge either. Not life-changing. Not compared to the Marlowe. Not compared to what Vanessa had inherited. But far more than anyone would pay for a dead motel. Dad had written across the bottom in blue ink. Too early. They know more than they're saying. I leaned back in his chair. Outside, a truck passed. The office window rattled. I could almost hear Dad clearing his throat. Too early. They know more than they're saying. I put every paper back exactly where I found it. Then I sat in that office until nearly 3 in the morning, not reading anymore, not searching, just listening to the highway. The next day was Friday. The boys should have gone to school, but I let them stay with me. I told myself it was because the drive from the motel would make them late. The truth was I could not bear to walk into the school office and explain why I was listing a motel as our temporary address. Ben thought it was an adventure by daylight. He found an old vending machine and asked if we could fix it. He dragged a stick through the gravel and made roads for his toy cars. He said room 6 was kind of like camping but with a toilet. Noah did not pretend as well. He helped me carry cleaning supplies from the office closet. He checked the locks on the rooms without being asked. He asked whether Dad knew where we were. "Your father knows we're safe," I said. That was not an answer, and he knew it. At 9:30, my phone rang. "Vanessa." I almost did not answer. "Claire," she said brightly, "I just wanted to check on you." "I'm fine." There was a pause. I could hear voices in the background, maybe Paul, maybe a contractor. "Grant told me you went to the motel." Of course he had. "He told you?" "He's worried." I looked at the office counter, at the dust my sleeve had smeared into a clean line. "Is he?" "Don't be like that." He said things got tense. "Did he mention he told me to go live here?" Vanessa exhaled. "Claire." I hated when she said my name like I was a difficult drawer she had to jiggle open. "I'm not getting in the middle of your marriage." "You called me." "I'm trying to help." "Look, Paul and I talked last night. If you want, we can connect you with a broker who handles distressed commercial sites. You might be able to unload it before it becomes a money pit." Unload it. That word settled over me. "What makes you think I want to sell?" "Because keeping it would be emotional, not practical." There it was again. Practical. Reality. Serious asset. Money pit. All the words people used when they wanted their opinion to sound like gravity. "I'm going to review the records first," I said. "Do you know how to do that?" I closed my eyes. "I'll learn." Vanessa softened her voice. "I know you're hurt. But Dad leaving you that place does not mean you have to prove something with it." I looked at the land folder still sitting on the desk. Maybe not. After we hung up, I made peanut butter sandwiches on paper towels and watched the boys eat them on the curb outside the office. The sun was higher then. The motel looked worse in daylight. Paint peeling. Gutters sagging. The pool fence bent inward on one side. The rooms on the far end had boards over 2 windows. But beyond the cracked parking lot, past the last row of rooms, the back acreage opened wider than I had ever noticed. Weeds, brush, an old gravel lane, a sagging wire fence, and beyond that a line of trees. I walked toward it after lunch. Noah followed. "You don't have to come," I said. "I know." We crossed behind room 12. The grass was high, scratching against my jeans. I saw an old survey stake near the fence line, bright orange tape faded but still tied to the top. A few yards farther, there was another. Newer. Fresh pink ribbon. Someone had been here recently. Noah crouched beside it. "What is that?" "A survey marker." "For what?" "I don't know yet." He looked at me, and for the first time since we left the house, I saw something besides worry in his face. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the beginning of trust. That afternoon, I called the county planning office. I expected to be brushed off. Instead, a woman named Marcy answered with the exhausted competence of someone who had been explaining public records to confused citizens for 20 years. I gave her the motel address. Keyboard clicking filled the silence. "Blue Ridge Motor Inn," she said. "Route 17 northbound frontage?" "Yes." "Owner listed as Leonard Hart." "He passed away." "I'm his daughter." "The property was left to me." "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." More clicking. "What are you trying to confirm?" I looked down at the yellow pad where I had copied Dad's phrases. Parcel 18B Route 17 Connector Improvement Study. Commercial rezoning. Marcy did not speak for a second. When she did, her tone changed. Not dramatic. Just more careful. You'll want to come in and request the corridor file. Is it public? Most of it. Some attached developer communications may not be, depending on how they were submitted. But the Planning Commission agenda is public. Transportation study summaries are public. Zoning maps are public. What does it mean? That's not something I can interpret for you over the phone. But there is something there. Another pause. There is an active corridor review involving that area. My hand tightened around the pen. Active as in possible? Active as in scheduled. For what? Ms. Hart, I really recommend you come in. Bring identification and whatever documents you have showing ownership transfer. When? Our office closes at 4:30. It was already 2:10. I looked at the boys through the office window. Ben was making gravel roads again. Noah sat on the curb watching trucks pass. I'll be there in 40 minutes, I said. The county building smelled like floor wax and old air conditioning. I brought both boys because I had nowhere else to put them. Ben carried his toy car. Noah carried the folder because he wanted something to do with his hands. Marcy was in her 50s, with short gray hair and red glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at my documents, copied my ID, and brought us to a public records computer. I can't give legal or financial advice, she said. I'm not asking for that. I'm saying it because people hear what they want in these files. I understand. She looked at me for a moment, as if deciding whether I did. Then she pulled up a map. The screen showed Route 17, the motel, surrounding parcels, and a colored overlay I had not seen before. Blue, yellow, and pale green lines crossed the land like someone had laid transparent ribbons over my father's life. Marcy pointed with the end of a pen. This is the current road. Yes. This is the proposed connector alignment. The blue line ran behind the motel. Exactly where Dad had drawn it. And this? I asked, pointing to a red mark near the back corner of the property. Potential access point. Not final. What does that mean? It means the State Transportation Department identified that area as one of the possible ingress and egress solutions if the connector and exit redesign move forward. I understood maybe half of that. But I understood possible access point. Access was everything in commercial property. Dad had said that for years. Landlocked dirt was dirt. Dirt with access became opportunity. What about rezoning? Marcy clicked again. A new map appeared. The corridor plan recommends commercial zoning consideration for several parcels near the proposed access area. Your property is included in the review area. Not automatically rezoned yet. That requires hearings and approval. But it is being considered. Yes. When? First hearing in 6 weeks. Planning Commission. Final county vote after that, if it advances. 6 weeks. I felt the room tilt slightly. Marcy printed the public agenda notice, the map, and instructions for requesting the full corridor packet. The printer made slow grinding sounds behind us. Ben whispered, "Mom, is Grandpa's motel important?" Marcy looked at him, then at me. I answered carefully. I think Grandpa wanted us to pay attention. That night, Grant called. I let it ring twice before answering outside room 6 while the boys watched a movie on my laptop. His voice was calm. Too calm. Are you done proving your point? I looked across the parking lot at the motel office. One lamp glowed inside, making the old glass look amber. What point? Claire. No, really. What point do you think I'm proving by sleeping in a motel room with our children? He sighed. I told you to take a couple days because things were heated. You chose to turn it into some exile. I laughed once. You told me to go live in the dead motel. I said maybe you should see what you were defending. I am. Silence. Something in my voice must have made him listen differently. What does that mean? It means I'm reviewing the records. You need to be careful. There's that word again. I'm serious. If you start poking around without knowing what you're doing, somebody will take advantage of you. I looked at the folder on the office counter through the window. Somebody already tried. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing. Claire, I can help you handle this. Yesterday you wanted me to unload it. That was before you started acting secretive. I almost told him then. Not everything. Just enough. Corridor plan. Rezoning. Development interest. I almost said the words because 10 years of marriage had trained me to bring new information to Grant like an offering. But I heard my father. Don't sign anything just because people are tired of waiting. And I realized signing was not only done with pens. Sometimes you signed away your advantage by speaking too soon. I'm tired, I said. The boys are fine. I'll call you tomorrow. Claire. Good night. I ended the call with my thumb shaking. The next week did not feel like a victory. That is another thing stories get wrong. Discovery is not the same as rescue. The motel still had bills. The water heater in room 3 groaned like an animal. The office toilet ran unless you lifted the handle. I found mouse droppings behind a stack of old brochures and spent an hour cleaning with a bandana tied over my nose. The boys needed rides to school from the wrong side of town. Noah got quiet. Ben told his teacher we were living in Grandpa's hotel, and the teacher sent me an email with too many gentle words in it. I drove to the county recorder's office, the planning office, and the bank. I learned that inheriting property is not the same as controlling it cleanly the next day. There were forms, waiting periods, tax questions, insurance notices, title updates, and a probate process that moved with the speed of a tired turtle. Mr. Halpern helped with the estate paperwork, but he did not swoop in like a movie attorney with all the answers. He reminded me that property could carry liability. He told me not to discuss sale terms with anyone until title transfer was confirmed. He told me to keep receipts, document communications, and pay the insurance. When I asked him if Dad knew about the corridor plan, he removed his glasses and cleaned them for a long time. Your father knew many things before most people were willing to say them out loud. Did he leave me that motel because of it? Mr. Halpern put his glasses back on. Leonard made his decisions intentionally. That's not an answer. It's the answer I can give you today. I hated him a little for that too. Everyone seemed to have a piece of my father they would not hand over. On the 6th day at the motel, an old white pickup pulled into the lot. A woman climbed out slowly, one hand braced on the door. She was thin, with silver hair pulled into a low braid and a face browned by sun. I recognized her after a moment. Mrs. Rowe. Her first name was Judith, but I had never called her that. She had managed the Blue Ridge office when I was little, back when guests still came often enough for management to mean something. She used to give me quarters for the vending machine if Dad said no. Claire Hart, she said when I stepped outside. You look like your mama when you're trying not to cry. I almost cried immediately, which seemed unfair. Mrs. Rowe. She hugged me with surprising strength. I heard about Leonard. I would have come to the funeral, but my hip was acting up and I don't drive far anymore. He would have understood. No, he would have complained I was making excuses, then brought me soup. She looked toward the rooms. You staying here? For now. Her eyes sharpened, but she did not ask. That was the first kindness that week. Not asking. I made coffee in the office, and she sat in Dad's chair without hesitation. That bothered me for 1 second, then comforted me. Some people belonged in his spaces. Mrs. Rowe looked around. He kept it cleaner than this when he was alive. I know. I'm working on it. I'm not criticizing you. I'm criticizing death. It lets dust get bold. I laughed for the first time in days. She took a sip of coffee and grimaced. This tastes like wet cardboard. It's from the gas station. That explains it. I showed her the ledger. Not all of it. Just the parcel numbers, the maps, the notes. She did not look surprised. You knew? I knew he was up to something. What? She tapped the page with one crooked finger. Your daddy started walking that back lot again about 2 years ago. Had survey boys out here twice. Men in clean shoes came by now and then. He never liked men in clean shoes. Developers? Some. County people maybe. One fella drove a black SUV and smiled too much. Leonard made me sit in the office while they talked because he said a man smiles different when there's a witness. What did they want? The land. Why didn't he sell? Mrs. Rowe leaned back. He said they wanted him to price it like a motel. I looked down at the ledger. What is it then? She looked out the window toward the back lot. Something that wasn't ready to be named yet. That sounded exactly like Dad. Mrs. Rowe reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. I wasn't sure whether to give you this. But Leonard left it with me last winter. Said if he passed and you came around asking about the backland, I should hand it over. My throat tightened. He left you something for me? Not money, she said. Don't look so hopeful. Inside the envelope was a photograph. Dad standing behind the motel, near the west fence, holding Ben when Ben was maybe 4. Noah stood beside them, squinting into the sun. Behind them, barely visible in the grass, was a survey stake with orange tape. On the back, Dad had written, Claire notices what other people step over. Below that, tell her not to rush. I sat down because my knees felt strange. Mrs. Rowe looked at me kindly, which was worse. He thought Vanessa would want the shiny one, she said. No offense. Your sister has always liked a lobby. I wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand. Why wouldn't he just tell me? Would you have believed him? I did not answer. Would Grant? That time, I looked up. Mrs. Rowe's face did not change. What do you know about Grant? I know men. Not all of them. Enough. I folded the photograph back into the envelope. Mrs. Rowe stood to leave, then paused by the door. Leonard told me once, Judith, if I say what that place could be worth, half the family will start loving Claire louder than they ever respected her. Her voice softened. I think he wanted you to hear the quiet first. After she left, I sat with the photograph for a long time. Claire notices what other people step over. I had spent years feeling invisible in my own life. My father had called it noticing. That changed something in me, but not all at once. Strength does not arrive like a marching band. Sometimes it comes as a small refusal. That night, when Grant texted, "Are you coming home tomorrow?" I typed, "Not yet." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. He wrote, "This is unhealthy for the boys." I looked through the motel room window. Noah was helping Ben tape a paper sign to the wall over the nightstand. It said home base in blue marker. I wrote, "They're okay." Grant replied, "You don't get to decide that alone." I almost answered. Instead, I set the phone face down. The next morning, Vanessa arrived in heels. No one wears heels to a dead motel unless they want the gravel to know they have options. She stepped out of her SUV holding 2 coffees and a white pastry bag. Paul stayed in the passenger seat, talking on his phone. "I come in peace," she said. I stood in the office doorway. "Did Grant send you?" Her smile tightened. "No. Can I not visit my sister?" "You can." She looked past me into the office, then at the cracked pavement, the old sign, the rooms. "Oh, Claire." 2 words. So much pity packed inside them. I took 1 coffee because refusing would make the conversation last longer. Vanessa handed me the pastry bag. "Croissants. The boys like chocolate, right?" "Ben does." She nodded, pleased with herself. We sat in the office. Vanessa did not sit in Dad's chair. She chose the guest chair and crossed her legs carefully. "I know things have been hard." I waited. "And I know Grant can be blunt." "That's 1 word." "He's under pressure too." I looked at her. "Are you here to talk about my marriage?" "No. I'm here because Paul and I found someone who might be interested in the motel." My hand stopped on the coffee lid. "Already?" "It's just a conversation." "With who?" "A broker Paul knows. He handles redevelopment scraps." "Redevelopment scraps." She winced. "That came out wrong." "Did it?" "Claire, you are defensive because you're hurt." I set the coffee down. "You keep telling me what I am." "Because you won't talk to me." "I'm talking." "No, you're sitting there like Dad used to when he thought everyone else was stupid." That hit closer than she knew. Vanessa looked around the office. "I don't want this place to swallow you. That's all. You have the boys. You have no steady income. Grant is angry. Probate isn't even finished. And this motel." She exhaled. "It's not the Marlowe." "No. It isn't." Her face softened. "Dad gave us what he thought we could handle." There it was. The sentence landed between us like a stone. I knew she meant it one way. Maybe Dad did too, in another. "What do you think I can handle?" I asked. Vanessa looked uncomfortable. "I think you're good with people. With home. With the boys. With emotional things. And you're good with assets." "That's not what I said." "It is what everyone keeps saying with different clothes on." She reached across the desk and touched my hand. "I am trying to protect you from making this into a test of your worth." I pulled my hand back gently. "What if it already is?" Before she could answer, Paul entered without knocking. He wore sunglasses on his head and carried the smell of expensive cologne into the dusty office. "Claire," he said warmly. Too warmly. "How are you holding up?" "Fine." He nodded at the files on the desk. "Digging in?" "A little." "Good. Good. You know, sometimes these little roadside parcels have more headaches than they're worth. Environmental, drainage, access, old underground tanks, who knows? Best thing is often to let a specialist take it off your hands." "Is your broker a specialist?" "He knows buyers." "What kind of buyers?" Paul smiled. "The kind with cash." I looked at Vanessa. She looked at Paul. Something passed between them. Not guilt. Coordination. That was the first time I wondered whether they knew more than they were saying. Not the full truth. Not Dad's plan. But something. Maybe Paul had heard a rumor about the corridor. Maybe Vanessa had asked around. Maybe Grant had mentioned my sudden interest and they had decided I was in over my head. I folded my hands on the desk. I'm not discussing sale options yet. Paul's smile thinned. Smart to be cautious. Just don't be so cautious you miss a clean exit. Mrs. Rowe's voice in my memory. They wanted him to price it like a motel. I said, I'm not looking for an exit. Vanessa stared at me. Paul laughed softly. Well, he said, every property has an exit. That's kind of the point. No, I said. Some have entrances. He did not like that. After they left, I watched their SUV pull back onto Route 17. Vanessa waved. Paul did not. That afternoon, I sent a written request for the full public corridor packet. I also called an independent appraiser named Alan Reed, whose name Mr. Halpern gave me with the warning that Alan was expensive and deeply irritating in the service of accuracy. Alan did not make me feel better. He met me at the motel 2 days later wearing work boots, khaki pants, and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He was in his late 60s, tall, with a nose that had been broken once and an expression that suggested he had never been impressed by anyone's optimism. He walked the property for 2 hours. He measured, photographed, frowned, asked for maps, frowned again, and made notes without telling me what they meant. Finally, we stood behind the motel near the survey stakes. I said, Is it worth anything? He looked at me over his glasses. Everything is worth something. That is not helpful. I'm not paid to be comforting. I noticed. He almost smiled. Then he pointed toward the road. As a motel operation, this is weak. Buildings are tired. Brand value non-existent. You'd spend more reviving it than you'd make back for years, unless you're sentimental or foolish or both. My stomach sank despite everything I knew. But your father did not keep this for the rooms. The air seemed to change. Alan pointed toward the back acreage. That rear strip, combined with frontage and potential access, is the question. If the connector proceeds and commercial rezoning is approved, this becomes a different category of property. What category? Strategic. I had never loved an unromantic word so much. He continued, but strategic land attracts strategic buyers, and strategic buyers prefer sellers who don't know that. I thought of Paul. The broker. Cash buyers. What should I do? Nothing quickly. I almost laughed. My father wrote that. Then your father was a smart man. What is it worth? Today? One number. After rezoning? Another. After access confirmation? Another. If a developer needs assemblage with adjacent parcels? Another. Anyone giving you one simple number right now is either guessing or hoping you'll believe them. Could it be worth more than the Marlowe? Alan looked toward the motel. That depends on the Marlowe's debt, condition, and income. Pretty buildings can be ugly on paper. Some properties only look good from the lobby. My father's voice moved through me like a hand on my shoulder. Alan promised a preliminary report in 10 days. 10 days felt impossible. Grant lasted 2. He showed up on a Thursday evening just as I was trying to fix the office printer. The boys were doing homework in room 6. I saw his car before he got out and felt my body react before my mind did. Shoulders tight. Jaw locked. Breath shallow. Marriage teaches your nervous system a language. Grant stepped into the office wearing the gray sweater I used to like. He looked around with obvious distaste and tried to hide it half a second too late. Claire. Grant. You won't answer my calls. I answer some. That's not marriage. No, I said. It isn't. His mouth tightened. I came to see the boys. They're doing homework. I'm their father. I don't need an appointment. I didn't say you did. He looked at the file spread across the desk. What is all this? Records. What kind? Property records. Claire. The way he said my name carried 10 years of correction. I closed the folder. He saw it. Something in him sharpened. What are you hiding? Why do you assume I'm hiding something? Because you're acting like a different person. I looked at him for a long moment. No. I'm acting like someone you can't interrupt. That landed. He took a step back, then recovered. Look, I know I was harsh. I said nothing. I shouldn't have said it the way I did. Still nothing. You put me in a difficult position. There it was. The apology folded into an accusation. I put you there? You came home from that while reading humiliated and expected me to pretend it wasn't humiliating. I expected you not to add to it. He looked away. Outside, a truck rumbled past. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Come home. We'll figure out the motel together. Why? Because we're married. That was your reason when you thought it would cost money. Now it's your reason when you think it might not. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? You tell me. I don't know what game you're playing. That's because you're used to writing the rules. He stared at me like he was seeing a person who had walked into the room wearing my face. Maybe I was. He went to see the boys. I let him because they wanted to see him, and because my anger did not erase their need. Through the office window, I watched him crouch beside Ben in the parking lot, admiring the gravel road system Ben had built. I watched Noah stand slightly apart, hands in his hoodie pocket, answering questions with one shoulder lifted. Grant looked like a good father from a distance. Most complicated people do. When he left, Noah came into the office. Are we going back home? I took a breath. I don't know yet. He nodded. Do you want to? That question should not come from a 12-year-old. I sat on the edge of the desk. I want us to be somewhere people don't use a door like a punishment. Noah looked down at the floor. Dad said he didn't mean it. I know. Do you believe him? I thought about lying. Instead, I said, I believe he doesn't like what it made him look like. Noah absorbed that. Then he said, Grandpa liked this place? Yes. Maybe he knew Dad wouldn't. I looked at my son. Sometimes children say the thing adults are building whole legal cases to avoid. A week later, the corridor packet arrived by email. It was 186 pages. I printed it at the library because the motel printer had surrendered. The stack of paper was so thick Ben asked if it was a book. In a way, it was. A boring, bureaucratic book about my father's last secret. There were maps, studies, meeting notes, traffic counts, environmental constraints, projected commercial demand, public comments, and references to parcels by number instead of name. Parcel 18B appeared 17 times. The Blue Ridge property sat near one of 3 possible access points. Not guaranteed. Not final. Not a lottery ticket wrapped in certainty. But important. Important enough that developers had been watching. Important enough that Dad had refused to sell early. Important enough that Paul's cash buyers suddenly made more sense. On page 112, I found a note from a public comment meeting. L. Hard asked whether acquisition offers made before final alignment disclosure could be considered speculative pressure on legacy owners. I read that sentence 4 times. Speculative pressure on legacy owners. It sounded like Dad. Formal when angry. Polite enough to be recorded. Sharp enough to leave a mark. On page 138, there was a map showing future commercial nodes. The motel property was shaded pale orange. Potential highway service commercial. I did not understand every implication. But I understood enough to call Alan. He answered on speaker, wind whipping around his voice. "You got the packet?" he asked. "Yes." "Page 138? "Yes." "Good. Do not talk to your brother-in-law." I froze. "What?" "Just advice." "What makes you say that?" "Because I got a call this morning from a man named Paul Dillard asking general questions about distressed motel values along Route 17. My hand went cold. "He called you?" "He did not know I was engaged by you. He said he had a family member with a small property problem." I sat down in Dad's chair. "What did you tell him?" "That distressed motel values depend on whether the person asking is trying to buy one or steal one." Despite everything, I smiled. "What did he say?" "He laughed too much. Men in clean shoes. Men who smile too much." Dad and Alan would have liked each other. When Vanessa called that evening, I did not answer. She texted instead. "Paul said you may be misunderstanding some planning documents. Please don't make decisions based on random paperwork. We're worried." We. A small word that can become a wall. I wrote back. "I'm getting professional guidance." She responded almost immediately. "From who?" I looked at the screen. Then I deleted my half-written answer. The next morning, Grant sent a longer message. "I talked to Vanessa and Paul. Everyone agrees this is getting out of hand. You're isolating yourself at that motel, filling your head with property theories, and keeping the boys in an unstable situation. I want you home this weekend. We can discuss the property rationally and make a plan." I read it while standing in the motel laundry room, where an old washer had overflowed and soaked my shoes. Rationally. Make a plan. Everyone agrees. I set the phone on top of the dryer and laughed until my eyes burned. Then I mopped the floor. That was the strange thing about those weeks. The biggest moments happened beside ridiculous tasks. I learned about rezoning between loads of laundry. I read developer letters while Ben asked for macaroni. I cried in the office bathroom, then plunged the toilet. I copied parcel maps at the library while Noah worked on a science project beside me. Life did not pause because I was becoming someone else. 2 days later, I received the first direct offer. Not from Meridian Road Partners, the company in Dad's old letter. From a different group called Cobalt Site Acquisition. The email was polite, brief, and full of words designed to flatten urgency into business. "Ms. Hartmercer, our group has interest in acquiring hospitality or redevelopment parcels along the Route 17 corridor. We understand the Blue Ridge motor inn may no longer be operational. We are prepared to discuss an as-is purchase." The number attached was almost insulting. 6 months earlier, I might have cried with relief over that amount. It would have paid debts. It would have given me rent money. It would have allowed me to leave Grant without panic. That was the danger. Low offers do not always look low to people who are scared. The first offer looked like rescue. That was the dangerous part. I was sitting in the motel office with a leaking ceiling, 2 tired children, a marriage collapsing behind me, and a bank account that made every grocery trip feel like math. So when I saw the number, my first feeling was not suspicion. It was relief. I hated that. I hated that a number too low for the land could still look high to a woman who had been sleeping beside a broken lamp in room 6. Alan read the offer and called me 9 minutes later. "Do not answer this with emotion," he said. "It's a lot of money." "No. It is a lot of pressure wearing a money costume." I looked at the cracked office window. "What if I need it?" "You might," he said. "But needing money and being for sale are 2 different things." I wrote that down. Not because it was poetic. Because I needed it. Being scared is not the same as being for sale. On Sunday, Aunt Lydia called. I expected more pressure. Instead, she asked whether I had eaten. I'm fine, I said. That means no. I had coffee. Coffee is a beverage, not a meal. She arrived an hour later with chicken soup, cornbread, and the worried face of a woman who had stayed quiet too many times in rooms where men mistook volume for truth. She hugged the boys, inspected the motel room, and announced it needed curtains that did not look like a raccoon died in them. Then she came to the office and sat across from me. Vanessa called me, she said. I figured. She's upset. I figured that too. She says you're not listening. I leaned back. Are you here to tell me to listen? No. I'm here to tell you I remember something. The whole office seemed to still. Aunt Lydia looked toward Dad's chair, then back at me. Your father came to my house in January. He had a folder with him. He was tired. I could see it, but he kept pretending he was just winded from the porch steps. My throat tightened. He asked me something strange. He asked if I thought you trusted your own judgment. I looked down. What did you say? I said you trusted it until someone you loved disagreed with you. That hurt because it was true. Aunt Lydia reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He left this with me. Said if things got messy, I should give it to you. I did not know what messy meant. Now I suspect I was slow. The paper was not a letter. Not exactly. It was a copy of an old page from Dad's notebook. At the top, he had written, Claire, strengths people misread. Below that, patient, not passive. Careful, not weak. Quiet, not empty. Loyal, but not blind. At the bottom, do not let them turn speed into wisdom. I pressed the paper against my chest before I knew I was doing it. Aunt Lydia's eyes filled. I am sorry, she said. For what? For smiling at that dinner. I closed my eyes. She continued, I knew Grant was being cruel. I knew Vanessa was enjoying the wrong part of it. And I sat there because I did not want to make it worse. That's what everyone says. I know. We sat quietly. Then Aunt Lydia said, Your father did not think Vanessa was bad. I know. He thought she was hungry. That surprised me. For what? Proof. I thought of Vanessa in her cream blazer, lifting her chin when the Marlowe was named. Aunt Lydia folded her hands. Vanessa always wanted your father to look at her and see success. You wanted him to look at you and see you. Those are different hungers. I did not want to feel compassion for Vanessa. It arrived anyway, unwanted and inconvenient. That did not excuse her. But it made the story heavier than revenge. The Planning Commission hearing took place on a rainy Thursday evening. I almost did not go. The boys had colds. My hair would not dry right. Grant had sent 3 messages asking to take them for the weekend, each one sounding more like a custody memo than a father. Vanessa had stopped calling but started sending articles about failed redevelopment projects and environmental cleanup costs. I sat in the motel office at 5:30, wearing my only decent blazer over a blouse with a tiny coffee stain near the cuff, and considered staying home. Then Noah came in and said, Grandpa would go. I looked at him. He shrugged. Probably. So I went. The hearing room was not dramatic. Fluorescent lights, rows of beige chairs, microphones that squeaked, commissioners shuffling papers. A few property owners attended. Some looked bored. Some looked angry. Developers sat in clusters, speaking quietly. Men in clean shoes. I saw Paul before he saw me. He stood near the back, talking to a man I recognized from the Cobalt email signature. My stomach tightened. Vanessa was not with him. Paul laughed at something the man said. Too much. I sat 3 rows behind them and opened my folder. The hearing lasted almost 2 hours. There were presentations about traffic flow, environmental impact, commercial use, buffer zones, tax base, access management. I understood more than I would have 2 weeks earlier and less than I wanted. When public comment opened, several people spoke. A farmer worried about losing frontage. A gas station owner supported the project but wanted signage protections. A woman who lived nearby asked whether truck traffic would increase. Then Paul stood. My heart began to pound. He introduced himself as a local property investor with family ties to the corridor. Family ties. Not owner. Not representative. Just close enough to sound relevant. He spoke for 6 minutes without saying my name. That was what made it worse. He talked about deteriorating roadside properties. He talked about public safety. He talked about heirs who lack the resources to manage complicated commercial parcels. He talked about responsible transition and productive use. Every sentence wore a suit. Every sentence pointed at me. By the time he finished, nobody in that room had heard the words Blue Ridge Motor in from his mouth, but they had heard enough to imagine a helpless woman holding up progress because she was sentimental about her dead father's motel. I sat there with my folder in my lap and felt the old version of myself trying to stay quiet. Then I heard my father's handwriting. Do not let them turn speed into wisdom. I stood up. My knees were shaking when I reached the microphone, but my voice did not break. My name is Claire Hartmercer, I said. I represent the Blue Ridge Motor and property. Paul turned around so fast his chair made a sound against the floor. I want the record to show 3 things, I continued. The property is not abandoned. The property is not distressed. And no person in this room has authority to discuss, market, transition, or represent that land except me. The room went still. I looked directly at Paul then. Anyone suggesting otherwise is not helping my family. They are helping themselves. No one clapped. I was grateful for that. Applause would have made it feel like theater. I needed it to be record. One commissioner nodded. Thank you, Ms. Mercer, she said. I walked back to my chair without looking at Paul again. But I felt him looking at me. After the meeting, he caught me in the hallway. Claire, he said, keeping his voice low. That was unnecessary. I kept walking. He matched my pace. I was speaking generally. No, you weren't. He glanced around. People were passing us, and he did not want to look like he was cornering his sister-in-law in a county building. You don't understand the implications of what you're sitting on. I stopped. There it was. Not what you own. What you're sitting on. I turned to face him. I understand enough to know you called my appraiser. His mouth tightened. I made a general inquiry. You also brought a buyer to a public hearing and described properties like mine as burdens. Because they are, if mishandled. By who? Claire. There was the family voice again. The one that makes your name into a leash. I said, do not contact buyers, brokers, appraisers, county officials, or developers about my property again. His expression hardened. You're making this personal. It became personal when you tried to make me sound incompetent in public. I was trying to protect Vanessa's family from a mess. I almost asked what Vanessa had to do with it. Then I saw the answer. Not completely. Just the edge. The Marlowe, I said. His eyes flickered. What about it? What's wrong with the Marlowe? Nothing. Too fast. I stepped closer. Paul. He looked over my shoulder toward the parking lot doors. You should talk to your sister. Then he left. I sat in my car for 15 minutes after that, rain tapping the roof, heater blowing lukewarm air onto my wet shoes. I did not feel triumphant. I felt cold. Because money does something strange to families. Not when there is a lot of it. When people believe there might be. That night, Vanessa called 6 times. I answered the 7th because the boys were asleep and I was too tired to watch the phone light up again. Her voice was tight. What did you say to Paul? What did Paul say to me? Claire, don't do this. Do what? Act like everyone is against you. You sent him to find buyers. I asked him to help. Without asking me? You weren't being reasonable. I closed my eyes. Tell me what's happening with the Marlowe. Silence. Long enough to answer. Nothing is happening. Vanessa. She exhaled shakily. You don't understand what Dad left me either. That sentence broke through my anger. Then explain it. At first, she did not. Then, slowly, like pulling thread from a tight seam, she told me. The Marlowe was beautiful. It was also expensive. Dad had kept it stable because he owned it without the kind of debt Vanessa and Paul assumed came with every serious asset. But the building needed work. Roof, boiler, 2 vacant units, a pending insurance dispute over water damage, and a reserve fund smaller than Vanessa expected because Dad had recently paid for major repairs in cash rather than carrying loans. Vanessa had imagined inheriting an empire. She inherited responsibility with a marble lobby. Paul wanted to refinance aggressively, pull cash out, and use the building as proof they could move into larger deals. The bank wanted updated appraisals, repair documentation, tenant records, debt service projections. Investors Paul had been courting were suddenly less impressed by beauty than by numbers. I thought Dad gave me the real asset, Vanessa said, and for once there was no performance in her voice. Then I opened the operating file. I sat very still. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were at that motel and I. She stopped. You what? I needed you to still be the one who got less. The honesty was so ugly I almost respected it. Vanessa began to cry, not loudly this time. I'm sorry. I looked at the dark motel room around me. Ben's stuffed dog lay on the other bed. Noah's wet sneakers sat by the heater. My father's papers were stacked in a milk crate beside the nightstand because I no longer trusted the office file cabinet. I don't know what to do with that, I said. I know. Paul is not allowed to interfere again. I'll tell him. No. You'll stop him. Another silence. Then Vanessa said, okay. It was the first time she did not argue. But apologies do not undo pressure. They only reveal whether pressure will continue. In the days after the hearing, everything moved faster. Cobalt raised their offer before I had even responded properly to the first one. Meridian Road Partners contacted Mr. Halpern, which meant they knew enough to behave formally. Their representative, a man named Ellis Porter, requested a meeting and included a proof of funds letter. Alan said they were serious. A third group sent a letter overnight. Grant stopped texting about the boys and started texting about marital interest, shared financial future, and not making unilateral decisions. I forwarded everything to Mr. Halpern, who forwarded me the name of a divorce attorney without commentary. I stared at that email for a long time. Divorce attorney. The words did not shock me. They made me tired. That was when I knew my marriage had ended before I filed anything. People think the end of a marriage is a door slamming, a confession, a betrayal discovered in lipstick or hotel receipts. Sometimes it is quieter. Sometimes it is the moment good news arrives and your first instinct is to hide it from the person who promised to build a life with you. I met the divorce attorney on a Monday. Her name was Marla Chen. She had short black hair, a calm face, and the kind of office where nothing was decorative enough to distract you from decisions. She listened without interrupting while I explained the will, the motel, Grant telling me to leave, the children, the property interest, the development situation. When I finished, she asked, "Do you want a divorce?" "Not. Have you tried counseling?" "Not. Are you sure?" "Not. What about the boys?" Just the question. I looked at my hands. I don't want to live in a house where my sons learn that respect depends on appraisal value. Marla nodded once. That is an answer. Filing was not cinematic. It involved forms, retainers, financial disclosures, custody schedules, copies of tax returns I had to dig out of a box in the garage after arranging with Grant to enter the house while he was at work. Walking back into that house was harder than I expected. It looked almost the same. The blue bowl by the door where we kept keys. The family calendar on the fridge. Ben's drawing still taped near the pantry. My mug in the cabinet. But the house no longer felt like mine. Or maybe it never had in the way I needed it to. In the bedroom, I packed more clothes. I opened the nightstand drawer and found an anniversary card Grant had given me 3 years earlier. To Claire, who keeps us steady. I sat on the edge of the bed holding that card. Keeps us steady. Not loved. Not seen. Steady. Useful, in prettier language. I left the card in the drawer. When I returned to the motel, the boys were with Aunt Lydia, and an email from Meridian waited in my inbox. Meeting request confirmed. Alan insisted on attending. Mr. Halpern insisted on reviewing anything before I signed. Marla told me not to discuss numbers with Grant beyond what disclosure required. Mrs. Rowe told me to wear shoes that did not hurt, because men already talk too much when women are uncomfortable. The Meridian meeting took place at the motel office because I wanted them to see the place as it was. Not staged. Not polished. Not apologized for. Ellis Porter arrived with 2 associates. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with a quiet manner and a leather portfolio. He did not smile too much. I appreciated that. He asked permission before walking the property. He took photos openly. He did not call the motel distressed, though one associate wrote deferred maintenance in her notebook, which was fair. We walked the back acreage. Ellis stood near the survey stake and looked toward the road. Your father declined 3 conversations with us. I know. He said timing mattered. That sounds like him. He also said if we came back after his death and tried to talk his daughter into a quick sale, he would haunt our title work. Alan made a sound that might have been a cough or a laugh. I looked away so they would not see my face change. Back in the office, Ellis laid out their interest. Not a simple purchase. Not at first. They wanted a phased agreement, option money up front, due diligence tied to zoning and access approvals, a purchase of part of the land if the project advanced, and the possibility of retaining a small ground lease interest in a future commercial pad. It was more complicated than a check. It was also smarter. Alan asked hard questions. Mr. Halpern, on speaker, asked harder ones. I mostly listened, taking notes in a notebook Dad had left in the desk. At one point, Ellis looked at me and said, "Ms. Mercer, what outcome are you looking for?" No one had asked me that yet. Everyone else had told me what outcome made sense. I looked through the office window at the old sign still flickering, at the pool fence, at the room where my children had slept because their father wanted to teach me reality. I don't want to sell my father's patience for someone else's convenience, I said. Ellis nodded slowly. That gives us something to work with. The first real offer was not final. the second was better. The third changed my life on paper, though I did not let myself believe it until Mr. Halpern said, "This is no longer speculative conversation. This is a serious proposal." Even then, it did not feel like winning. It felt like standing at the edge of a bridge I had not decided to cross. Grant found out from financial disclosures. I did not tell him directly. I had stopped bringing him my life before he could correct it. He called 12 times in one afternoon. When I finally answered, his voice was not angry. That frightened me more. "Claire," he said softly. "Why didn't you tell me?" I stood in the motel office, looking at the place on the wall where the old key rack hung. "Tell you what? Don't do that. I know there are offers." "Then you know. We're married. We are separated. Legally, we're still married." There it was. The shift from husband to claimant. "What do you want, Grant?" He breathed out. "I want to come talk to you. In person. Without lawyers." "No. Claire. No. We have children." "Yes. We do. And a decade together." "Yes. And you're going to let attorneys turn this into a war?" I closed my eyes. "You sent me and our children to this motel when you thought it was worthless. I made a mistake. You made a judgment. That's not fair. It was your judgment that was unfair. I'm just repeating it accurately." His voice tightened. I was angry. So was I. "I didn't throw you out of your home." Silence. Then he said the thing I knew was coming. "I never stopped loving you." My hand went still. Once, that sentence could have pulled me across any distance. I would have heard pain, regret, history. I would have remembered our first apartment, the soup he brought when I was sick, the way he cried when Noah was born, the early years before correction became the weather in our house. I did remember those things. That was why I answered carefully. "I think you loved the version of me that stayed where you put her." He did not speak. Outside, Ben laughed at something Noah said near the vending machine they had decided was a restoration project. I said, "The boys can see you Saturday. Aunt Lydia will handle pickup." "Claire, please." I almost broke then. Not because I wanted to go back. Because leaving someone fully is different from escaping them for the night. It has paperwork. Schedules. Holidays. Children packing bags. Empty chairs at school concerts. It is grief for the version of life you tried to build even when the person beside you kept removing bricks. But grief is not an instruction. I said, "Goodbye, Grant." The final county vote happened in late summer. By then, I had moved the boys into a small rental house 15 minutes from the motel and closer to school. It had a porch, bad water pressure, and a kitchen window over the sink. Ben loved it because there was a tree he could climb. Noah liked that his room faced the street. I liked that no one in that house had ever told me to leave. The vote was not the end of the process, but it was the hinge. Commercial rezoning passed for the corridor area, including the relevant portion of the Blue Ridge property, with conditions tied to access planning and traffic improvements. I sat in the back of the hearing room when it happened. No one clapped. Government does not usually give you music when your life changes. A motion was made, seconded, discussed, amended, voted on. Papers shuffled. The next agenda item began. But I sat there with both hands in my lap, feeling my father beside me more clearly than I had at his funeral. Afterward, Vanessa found me in the hallway. She looked tired. Less polished than usual. The Marlowe had become a difficult teacher. "I heard it passed," she said. "Yes. Congratulations." I waited for the second sentence. "The one with the hook in it." It did not come. She looked toward the hearing room doors. Paul and I are separating. I had not expected that. I'm sorry. She gave a small laugh. Are you? Yes. I don't know if I am yet. We stood side by side as people moved around us. She said, he wanted me to push you harder. I know. I wanted to, at first. I know that too. Her eyes filled, but she did not perform the tears. She blinked them back. When Dad left me the Marlowe, I thought it meant he saw me as the capable one. I said nothing. And when he left you the motel, I thought. She stopped. That he saw me as sentimental. Maybe. Or safe. Or less ambitious. I don't know. She looked at me. But I think he knew I wanted the thing people could admire right away. Some properties only look good from the lobby. I did not say it. I did not need to. Vanessa wiped under one eye. I'm sorry for needing you to be smaller. That was the first apology from her that reached me. Not because it fixed everything. Because it named the correct wound. I nodded. I'm sorry the Marlowe is harder than you thought. She laughed once. It is a beautiful nightmare. Dad specialized in educational gifts. That made her really laugh, and for a second we were girls again in the back of Dad's truck, fighting over the last peppermint candy. Then the moment passed. Vanessa looked down the hallway. Are you selling? Part of it. Not all. Meridian and another group are competing on structure now. Alan is making everyone miserable. Good. She shifted her purse on her shoulder. Paul said you'd get greedy. I smiled a little. I'm not greedy. No, she said. You're finally expensive. I carried that sentence with me for days. The agreement took months. People who tell stories like this often skip the months because months are not glamorous. Months are email chains, revised terms, environmental assessments, title questions, access contingencies, tax planning, child custody mediation, school drop-offs, and nights when you eat crackers over the sink because you are too tired to cook. Months are where transformation either becomes real or turns back into a mood. The motel did not instantly become a gold mine. It became work. The environmental inspection found an old underground fuel tank from decades earlier that nobody had properly documented. That delayed everything. The neighboring parcel owner tried to hold out for a ridiculous number, which affected access planning. One developer withdrew. Meridian stayed, then lowered a term, then raised another. Alan told me I was learning the sacred art of not flinching. Grant's attorney argued that any increase in value during the marriage should be considered in divorce negotiations. Marla countered that inherited property was separate, that Grant had abandoned the residence of his own wife and children, and that he had contributed nothing to the preservation or increase of the motel asset except disdain. Lawyers do not write sentences that satisfying in real filings, but she got close enough. Grant became polite in person. Painfully polite. At custody exchanges, he asked the boys about school, said hello to me without looking directly too long, and once brought Ben's forgotten jacket neatly folded in a grocery bag. He also asked, 3 different times, whether we could have dinner as adults. I said no each time. Not angrily. That was important. Anger can look like unfinished business. Calm refusal is harder to negotiate with. One Saturday in October, he arrived early to pick up the boys and found me on the porch repainting an old wooden chair from the motel office. It had been in storage, one of the few pieces I kept. He stood at the bottom of the steps. You always liked fixing things, he said. I kept painting. Some things. He looked toward the rental house. The boys seem okay. They are getting there. He nodded. I've been in counseling. I did look at him then. That's good. I mean it. I'm trying to understand some things. I hope you do. His face changed. A flicker of frustration, quickly controlled. Do you ever think about trying again? The brush moved slowly over the wood. No. He swallowed. Because of the motel? I set the brush across the paint can. No. Because you still think the motel is the reason. He looked away. I did not say more. There are explanations that become invitations. I was done inviting Grant to understand me. The boys came out then, backpacks slung over their shoulders. Ben ran to the car. Noah hugged me first, which he had started doing without embarrassment again. After they left, I finished painting the chair. It dried a soft blue, close to the color the motel sign might have been before weather took its share. The demolition permit came through in November. By then, the development agreement was signed. I did not sell everything. That was the part people had trouble understanding. I sold one section outright, entered a long-term ground lease on another, and retained a small interest tied to future commercial development. It was not the biggest possible gamble or the fastest possible payout. It was balanced, Alan said, which from him sounded like applause. The money that came up front was enough to change the boys' future, pay legal costs, secure housing, and give me something I had not felt in years. Margin. Not luxury. Margin. Space between disaster and one bad week. Space between a man's mood and my children's roof. Space between fear and decision. The night before demolition, I went to the motel alone. The rooms had been cleared. The office was empty except for Dad's chair, the front counter, and the old brass bell I used to ring as a child. Meridian had offered to have everything hauled away, but I wanted one last night to walk through it. The air smelled colder without furniture. My footsteps echoed in the rooms. In room 6, I stood where the boys had slept that first night. The water stain on the ceiling was still there. Someone had removed the curtains, and moonlight lay across the floor in a pale square. I remembered Ben asking if we were poor now. I remembered Noah asking if I wanted to go home. I remembered sitting on the edge of the bed, hating my father because grief needed somewhere to go. Then I walked to the office. The key rack was gone. The brochures were gone. The filing cabinet had been emptied. Dad's chair sat behind the counter, patched arms shining faintly. I rang the bell once. The sound was smaller than I remembered. I had brought 3 things with me: Dad's ledger, the photograph from Mrs. Rowe, and the page Aunt Lydia had given me. Claire, strengths people misread. Patient, not passive. Careful, not weak. Quiet, not empty. Loyal, but not blind. Do not let them turn speed into wisdom. I read it one more time under the office light. Then I folded it and placed it inside the ledger. For a while, I thought about leaving the ledger there. Letting the building take it. Letting memory stay with the walls. But my father had not preserved records so they could become dust. He had left evidence because he knew I would need more than emotion. So I carried the ledger out. The next morning, the boys came with me to watch from across the road. Vanessa came too. Aunt Lydia. Mrs. Rowe, bundled in a coat, leaning on a cane. Even Mr. Halpern came for a few minutes, pretending he happened to be nearby. Grant did not come. He texted at 7:12. Hope today goes the way you want. For once, I did not read between the words. I wrote. Thank you. That was all. The excavator started with the rooms on the far end. Wood cracked. Glass fell inward. Dust rose. Ben covered his ears. Noah stood with his hands in his pockets, face serious. Are you sad? He asked me. Yes. But it's good? Yes. He thought about that. Both things can happen? I put my arm around his shoulders. Most real things are both. When the office came down, Mrs. Rowe cried. Aunt Lydia held her hand. Vanessa stood beside me, silent. The old sign was already gone, but for a moment I could still see it in my mind, the crooked INN, the buzzing R, the weak red vacancy light pulsing against the dark. People had called it dead because they could not imagine a waiting thing. Months later, construction began on the access road. Not the full development yet. That would take time. Permits, grading, infrastructure, more meetings, more delays. But the land changed shape. Survey crews returned. Gravel moved. Orange cones appeared. Men in hard hats stood where weeds had grown taller than Ben. I opened a small office downtown to manage the property interests and the trust accounts for the boys. Nothing fancy. 2 rooms above a bakery. A desk. A filing cabinet. A plant Vanessa gave me that I managed not to kill. And Dad's blue chair by the window. On the day I moved in, I placed the old brass motel bell on the corner of the desk. Ben rang it immediately. Noah said, "That's annoying." It always was, I said. In the top drawer, I put the old key to room 6. Beside it, I placed the photograph of Dad with the boys behind the motel, the survey stake barely visible in the grass. For a moment, I considered locking the drawer. Then I closed it without turning the key. That afternoon, Grant came by to drop off a document Marla needed signed. He stood in the doorway of my new office and looked around. His eyes went to the chair, the bell, the folders, the window overlooking the street. "You did all this fast," he said. "No," I said. "I did it slowly. You just weren't watching." He nodded, accepting the correction in a way the old Grant would have fought. He handed me the envelope. "I'm sorry," he said. I looked at him. He had apologized before. For tone. For timing. For being under pressure. For saying things badly. This sounded different. So I waited. He said, "I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to become valuable before I respected you." The room went very quiet. Outside, someone laughed on the sidewalk below. The bakery door chimed. A delivery truck hissed at the curb. I wanted that sentence years earlier. I wanted it in the kitchen before the suitcases. I wanted it in the car after the will reading. I wanted it during the years I paid invoices at midnight and woke up early to pack lunches and stood beside him at parties while he described his business as if my labor was weather. But some apologies arrive after they can no longer purchase what they are asking for. "Thank you," I said. His face tightened, but he nodded. "I know it doesn't change things." "No," I said gently. "It doesn't." He looked at the brass bell. "Your dad would be proud of you." That almost undid me. But not because Grant said it. Because I knew it was true. After he left, I sat in Dad's chair by the window. The chair still squeaked. For the first time, the sound made me smile. Vanessa and I are not best friends now. Stories like this are cleaner when sisters fall into each other's arms and every old wound becomes a lesson. Real families do not heal on schedule. We talk more honestly. That is not the same as being close, but it is better than being polished. She still owns the Marlowe. She did not lose everything. She refinanced more carefully, replaced Paul's grand plans with a property manager who tells her the truth, and learned that a marble lobby does not collect rent by itself. Sometimes she calls me to complain about boilers. Sometimes I call her to ask about tenant notices. We are learning each other without the old scoreboard between us. Aunt Lydia says Dad would enjoy how much trouble his daughters are having with his gifts. Mrs. Rowe visits my office once a month and criticizes my coffee. Alan still sends emails with no greeting, just attachments and sentences like review section 4 before someone sells you sunshine. Mr. Halpern retired, then unretired part-time because, according to him, retirement involved too many people asking him to golf. The boys are okay. Not untouched. Children do not pass through family fracture untouched. But okay. Noah is less careful with his questions now. Ben no longer calls the rental house temporary. They see their father. They see me. They know love is not measured by who wins a property dispute, but I hope they also know something else. A person can be treated like a burden by someone who enjoys the benefit of their steadiness. A place can look empty because no one has bothered to read the map. A quiet woman can be patient without being available for erasure. Sometimes I drive past the old motel site in the mornings. The land no longer looks like the place I slept after my husband told me to leave. The back lot has been graded. The brush is gone. Utility markers stand in bright colors along the ground. The new access road curves exactly where Dad's blue line once crossed the map. There is no motel sign now. No vacancy light. No cracked pool. No room 6. For a while, I thought that would hurt every time. It does not. The Blue Ridge was never the gift by itself. It was the wrapping. Ugly, faded, hard to carry, and easy for proud people to laugh at. The gift was underneath. Not just land. Not just money. Not even the future security everyone eventually learned to respect. The gift was the last thing my father taught me without standing in the room. Do not hurry because someone louder is uncomfortable. Do not confuse polish with value. Do not call yourself empty because people who never looked closely said there was nothing there. On the first anniversary of the demolition, I brought the boys to the site just before sunset. We stood behind the safety fence, looking at steel frames rising where the office used to be. Ben asked if he could ring the motel bell when the first building opened. I said yes. Noah asked what Grandpa would have named the new place. I looked at the road, the curve of it, the cars moving past without knowing how long my father had waited for that exact line of traffic to matter. He probably wouldn't name it yet, I said. Why? I smiled. Because he'd want to see who was paying attention. That night, back at my office, I opened the top drawer and took out the old key to room 6. The brass had darkened from age. The plastic tag was cracked. The number was faded but still readable. I held it for a moment, remembering the motel room, the boys asleep under our jackets, the fear in my hands, the ledger waiting in the office. Then I placed the key beside Dad's photograph and closed the drawer. I did not lock it. There was nothing left in my life that needed to be hidden from people who only understood value after someone else named the price.